The snow fell like ashes, cold, heavy, and unrelenting. It was February 7th, 1807, and the town of Eylau in present-day Poland was buried under a curtain of icy fog. Soldiers, frozen to their bones, waited in silence. Somewhere in the mist, Napoleon Bonaparte stood surveying the battlefield, not with confidence but with tension in his jaw. Before him lay not just the Russian army, but the uncertainty of winter itself. What happened here? Why did the Emperor of France lead his exhausted, frost-bitten troops into a frozen wasteland to clash with an enemy that refused to retreat? And why is Eylau remembered as one of the bloodiest and most indecisive battles of Napoleon's entire military career? This wasn't a battle of glory. It was a battle of survival. In this video, we'll uncover how strategy, suffering, and sheer brutality defined the Battle of Eylau. You'll hear about the men who fought through blizzards, bayonets, cannon fire, hunger, and blind cavalry charges. You'll feel the stakes, the chaos, the terror, and the cost of every inch of ground they took, as if you were standing among them. Because sometimes history isn't written by the victors. Sometimes it's frozen in snow, soaked in blood, and nearly forgotten, until now. Let's begin this journey together. As we step into one of history's harshest battlefields, prepare to feel the cold, the chaos, and the courage that defined this forgotten clash of empires. The crushing victories at Jena and Auerstedt in October 1806 left Prussia's army in ruins, and King Frederick William III stripped of his main military force. With Prussia neutralized, Napoleon's path east opened, leading his Grande Armée into Poland and toward the heart of the Russian-led forces that had yet to engage him directly. Napoleon, seeking to crush the Fourth Coalition before it could regroup, hoped a swift winter campaign would corner the Russian forces. Meanwhile, Russia's aging commander, Field Marshal Mikhail Kamensky, hesitated to commit to battle. Retreat after retreat allowed the French to occupy key territory unopposed, crossing the Vistula, seizing Warsaw, and then engaging in minor victories at Czarnowo, Pultusk, and Gołymin in late December. Russian morale wavered as Napoleon advanced deeper into Polish territory, but the Russian army, larger and still unbroken, remained a significant threat. By January 1807, desperation stirred in the Russian command. General Levin August von Bennigsen replaced Kamensky and launched a bold offensive into East Prussia, aiming to outmaneuver Napoleon and strike isolated French corps north of Warsaw. At first it worked. Surprise movements and local support allowed Russian troops to gain ground. Napoleon, always quick to react, ordered a brilliant but risky maneuver: march north and envelop the Russians. However, his dispatches were intercepted by Cossacks and passed to Prince Bagration, alerting Bennigsen to the trap. The Russian army narrowly escaped encirclement near Jonkowo and regrouped further north closer to Eylau. Amid the howling winter, both sides danced between ambushes, marches, and freezing nights. French forces clashed with Russian rearguards at Bergfried and other villages, and by early February, the situation was volatile. Troops lacked food, proper shelter, and clear intelligence. By February 7th, Bennigsen had concentrated his men around Eylau. Napoleon's vanguard, Sultan Murat, arrived to find a tenacious Russian force. Bagration's troops defended the plateau fiercely, hoping to delay the French advance. Barclay de Tolly's rearguard held Eylau itself, forcing the French into brutal house-to-house combat. At around 2 p.m., the first major clash exploded. French and Russian soldiers fought across icy streets and churchyards, slipping in blood-soaked snow. The battle for Eylau dragged into the night, ending with the Russians retreating slightly to avoid encirclement, but at the cost of nearly 4,000 men per side. Eylau was now in French hands, but it was only the beginning. By February 6th, snow had thickened and tempers had frayed. French scouts reported the presence of Russian forces near Eylau, but uncertainty clouded Napoleon's decisions. Terrain reports were unclear and visibility worsened. Still, he pressed ahead, believing his speed would force Bennigsen to engage before the Russians were fully prepared. Bennigsen, meanwhile, counted on the weather and his Prussian allies to stall the French long enough for reinforcements to arrive. Local villagers, caught in the middle, abandoned homes or were forced to provide intelligence to whichever army arrived first. The air was not just cold, it was tense with foreboding. Winter's pall lifted only briefly on February 7th, 1807, as Napoleon's vanguard, Marshal Soult's 4 Corps and Murat's cavalry, surged onto the frozen plateau before Eylau. In mist-shrouded terrain, they collided with General Bagration's rearguard, entrenched roughly a mile from the village. Bagration's mission was clear: delay the French and buy time for the main Russian artillery and infantry to form a solid line. A tense and brutal fight erupted. Despite being outnumbered, Bagration held firm, retreating only when Soult, Augereau and the Imperial Guard converged in overwhelming force. His disciplined withdrawal drew a shield of Barclay de Tolly's troops into the town, where another fierce rearguard action unfolded amid church ruins and frozen graves. Casualties mounted, around 4,000 men lost on each side. Yet as night fell, Napoleon held the town. The Russians withdrew to regroup beyond it. That night conditions were unforgiving. Soldiers, French and Russian alike, huddled in the open, deprived of food and shivering in the relentless cold. Supply lines, roads and communication lay broken by frost and snowdrifts. As dawn broke on February 8th, both armies stood in parallel lines across the frozen wasteland, artillery bristling. French, some 45,000 men and approximately 300 guns. Russian, around 67,000 with approximately 400 guns. The day began with a brutal artillery exchange. Snow scudded across the battlefield, masking movements and blurring lines of sight. Napoleon saw the gravity of his mistake. He faced a battle he hadn't planned but could not evade. It was war at its most unforgiving. An accidental confrontation turned deadly. Soult's IV Corps pushed the Russian right, while Augereau and Saint-Hilaire advanced the center and left. Then disaster struck. In the blizzard, Augereau's entire corps drifted off course into the direct line of Russian artillery. The 14th Line Regiment stood their ground as their comrades fell by the thousands. Explosions shattered formations, blood mixed with snow. To prevent a total collapse, Napoleon ordered Marshal Murat to act. What followed was one of the largest cavalry charges in military history. Over 10,000 riders thundered into the storm, cutting through Russian lines in a desperate counterattack. The earth quaked beneath their hooves. They pierced Russian infantry, captured guns and stalled the momentum of the enemy. Daupul's cuirassiers led the charge, his armor glinting briefly before being lost in snow and smoke. He would not survive the day. Davout's the 3 Corps arrived just in time, pressing the Russian left and threatening to turn the tide. Napoleon's gamble seemed to be working, but just as the French edged closer to a breakthrough, Prussian troops under General Lestock appeared like ghosts from the east. Striking Davout's exposed flank, they saved the Russian line from collapse. The snow continued. At dusk, Ney's 6th Corps arrived, too late to reclaim lost momentum. What followed was hours of stagnant fighting, men firing blindly into white fog, too numb to reload quickly, too desperate to fall back. As midnight approached, the fighting ebbed. Under cover of darkness, Bennigsen ordered his battered army to retreat. The French were too spent to follow. Eylau belonged to Napoleon, but he had gained little but ground soaked in ice and blood. One French soldier later wrote in a letter home that the snow turned red faster than he'd ever seen. Men didn't scream when struck. They simply dropped, steam rising from their wounds. Officers used sword hilts as makeshift clubs when muskets jammed in the frost. Amid the horror, moments of raw humanity surfaced. Wounded soldiers dragged comrades from the front lines, sharing rations and warmth. But heroism was overwhelmed by slaughter. By late afternoon, the battlefield was nearly unrecognizable. Drifts of snow now mixed with shattered caissons, fallen horses, and the dead. Gunpowder smoke blanketed the horizon. Some units, reduced to half strength, fought on with frozen fingers and blind rage. The battle ground into a stalemate, neither side retreating, neither gaining decisive ground. The morning after the battle brought no triumph, only silence, frost, and death. The battlefield outside Eylau, once a storm of cannon fire and steel, had turned into a cemetery. Limbs jutted from snowbanks. Horses, men, and shattered cannon were frozen in place as if captured in a macabre painting. Over 50,000 men, French, Russian, and Prussian, lay dead or wounded. For hours, not even the crows stirred. Napoleon stood before this carnage, expressionless. He had held the ground, yes, but victory had never felt so hollow. His mighty Grand Army, which had thundered through Europe with unstoppable momentum, was shaken. Augereau's corps had been nearly destroyed. Murat's cavalry had charged with legend-making courage, but at a staggering cost. Ney would later summarize it with bitter finality. What a massacre, and for no result. Across the field, Bennigsen too counted his losses. Tens of thousands gone. That night, under cover of darkness and swirling snow, the Russian army quietly retreated. The French were too exhausted to pursue, their wounded groaning in makeshift field hospitals, or simply left in the cold. Survivors would forever remember Eylau not as a victory or a defeat, but as a nightmare. Strategically, nothing had changed. Eylau was no Austerlitz. It was a brutal, indecisive bloodletting, Napoleon's first serious check. The myth of his invincibility cracked, if not shattered. For the Russians, it was a bitter draw, but also a sign that the French could bleed. It showed Europe that the empire could stall, and that winter, terrain, and resolve could defy even the greatest general. In the months that followed, Napoleon regrouped. The war would continue. But something had shifted at Eylau, not just in tactics or morale, but in myth. The snow-covered fields whispered a different truth, that even the greatest generals cannot outmarch winter, nor silence the cries of the fallen. Here, amid frost and fog, the tide of legend slowed. And yet history nearly forgot this place. Eylau became a footnote, overshadowed by greater victories, grander treaties and more famous names. But to those who fought there, and to the frozen earth that drank their blood, it was unforgettable. If this story moved you, if these voices from the past deserve to be heard, subscribe for more immersive journeys into the forgotten battles of history. Pain lingered long after the guns fell silent. Letters sent to families often softened the truth, or never arrived at all. Some survivors deserted in the days that followed, unable to bear the trauma. Napoleon issued commendations, but the mood in camp was grim. Mass graves were dug in the permafrost. For months afterward, wolves and scavengers roamed the battlefield. Eylau taught both sides a cruel lesson. Even the most disciplined army can falter against nature and fatigue. Its legacy was not in conquest, but in caution. This is History Replay, this day.